So for the rest of this lecture, I'm going to go over some of the more commonly used vocational scales and what they are and how they differ. So the first one is a self-directed search. It's based on Holland's theory of career development. So again, we're going to see that Holland hexagonal model. It can be self-administered, self-scored, and self-interpreted. And a lot of times when you go online and find free versions, you're going to be finding some version of the self-directed scale. A lot of services might also charge you to do this process, but it's very self-directed. It includes dichotomous items, yes or no, like or dislike. So basically, do you agree with this item or do you not agree with this item? Do you like this idea or do you dislike this idea? And then in 4 sections, so activities, things you like to do. So again, least like or L or D, do you like it or you dislike it? Competencies, things one's are good at. It'll ask you, are you competent at this? Yes or no. And that's one thing you're going to notice is that a fair amount of these vocational tests try to make up for the fact that we're not measuring actual skills by putting in some form of self-report about your skill set. Just recognize that this isn't testing the actual presence of those skills. It's simply asking someone if they have it. So you might ask someone, are you really good at resolving problems with your family? And they might say yes, because they think they can. But in reality, if you ask anyone else in their family, like, no, he's horrible at that. So again, just recognize that this is self-report. There is then going to be a series of occupations on a yes no. Would you want to be a dentist? Would yes or no? Would you want to be an airline pilot? And then some self-estimates on your abilities. So again, this is a self-directed search that's going to give you that kind of general, do you like to do the things that are involved with these careers? Do you actually like the careers themselves as far as self-report, but also trying to get a little bit more at competencies. But again, it is going to be self-report. It's usually accompanied by an occupational finder booklet with hundreds of occupations by their RISET code. There's 4 versions. There's the R for high school, college, and adult. There's E for limited education or reading skills. There's a CPO for professionals in changing careers, and career exploration for junior high school students. So again, if you're taking the self-directed search, the SDS, you would also want to determine where you are in life. So if you were in high school or college or early career, you'd probably want to take the R. If you're administering this to someone that has limited education or reading skills, or perhaps English as a second language, you'd want to take the E version. It's much more visual. It doesn't have as much reading requirements. If you're actually in your career, you've been a professional for a while and you're thinking about changing careers, you'd want the CPO. And finally, if you were pre-high school, junior high school students, for instance, you'd probably want to take the Career Explorer version. And each one's going to give you a little bit of different information, and some of the questions are going to be different too, based on where you are in your lives. The next one is the Jackson Vocational Interest Survey, published first in 1977 by Douglas N. Jackson. It's used for high school and college students, and it's specifically designed to help pick career or major. So there's a lot more information in here about not just what career you'd be good for, but what major would get you to that career. So it measures 34 career interests, 8 work styles, work environment, or behavior. So again, getting at that idea of would you actually enjoy the work based on where you'd like to be? And again, just a very basic idea is, do you prefer to be indoors or outdoors? If you prefer to be outdoors, that's going to change some of the career options that you might enjoy. This is also going to include job security, leadership, accountability, things like that. There's also going to be 26 work roles. So instead of styles, roles. What is done on the job? So do you enjoy math? Do you enjoy life science? Do you enjoy teaching? Do you enjoy sales, business, adventure, authority, law and order? All of those are going to be roles that it's going to try to measure. And then it also tries to measure 13 broad college majors. So not just what career you'd be interested in, but also what college majors would match those interests. Now, these are very broad college majors, for example, liberal arts, not necessarily specifically psychology or literature, but engineering, liberal arts, education, broadly, what would be a good fit for you if you were going to continue your education. The Jackson Vocational Interest Survey does not use the Holland Index, and it's consisted of 289 ipsitative items. Ipsitative items means you have to choose one or the other. So example, do you like designing furniture or helping ex-patients of mental hospital gain employment? You have to choose one of those. Forming one system of equations from isolated discoveries in calculus versus collected used clothing and articles for the needy family. So again, it might seem like there's a lot of leeway between these two options, but you would be taking 289 of these, which means the test does a pretty good job of actually determining, based on all of your responses, what would be a good fit for your interests. Another one is the Cooter surveys, uses forced choice triad items. So we used this earlier as an example of relative. So again, you respond to most and least liked choices. So write a book, either most liked, least liked, or neither. So the neither is, it's a triad. In other words, you have to choose of these three, which one would you most like? Which one are you neutral on? Which one would you least like? So write a book, operate a bookstore, design a cover for a book. So for me, it would probably be most like would be writing a book, least like would be operating a bookstore, and neither would be designing a cover for a book. So again, we're kind of being forced here by these choices, but you can start to see, one's more creative, writing, one's more artistic, designing the cover, and one's more business focused, operating. So there's 10 interest scores from the Cooter survey. They break down into outdoor, mechanical, computational, scientific, persuasive, artistic, literary, musical, social, services, and clerical. So again, it doesn't use the RISIC 6, but you can see some of the RISIC in here. It's just making the argument that there's a few more core concepts. So for example, it has outdoors, but it still has mechanical, which is probably more close to realistic. It has scientific and persuasive, which is probably close to investigative. Artistic is still in there, but notice that social services is also there, so social interaction, but music, literary, and clerical are slightly different as well. So it's trying to kind of mix both broad interest, like the Holland does, with a little bit more of specific information of what kind of careers would make the most sense. So again, there are different forms of the Cooter survey. There's the Cooter General Interest Survey, the KGIS, typically used in grades 6 to 12. It encourages career exploration and class selection, has 168 items, and has been normed differently for boys and girls to kind of give the same response possibilities based on how they respond. It should be noted that generally speaking, we've talked about the fact that most assessments, one of the assumptions is that what we're assessing is relatively stable. From grade 6 to 12, we're starting to get into an area where they may not be as stable. So you can think about your own career choices. In grade 6, when you were 10 years old, what you wanted to be with your life and what you wanted to accomplish may very well differ from where you actually ended up. As a 10-year-old, I wanted to be a rock star without a question. I wanted to learn guitar and I wanted to be in a hard rock band. That was my dream. Turns out I'm not very musical. I don't really enjoy being that creative. It wasn't necessarily a good fit, but it's what I wanted. And if I had taken the KGIS at this time, I probably would have continuously circled things that would lend themselves to that career option. If I took that same test at 18, I had come to more realization of what I could and could not do in my life. I probably would have been closer to something very similar to what I now score much later in my life. The Cooter Occupational Interest Survey, the KOIS, is generally used for college students and adults. Occupational scales and college majors, list of occupations, 100 items, and scores are measured as a lambda coefficient. So there is a statistical technique that's going on here to get a better score, a more reliable score, and it's very much focused on occupations and based on the fact that it's usually being used on college students, those that are 19 and above. We usually also see a fair amount of reliability in how someone scores in this test if we gave it to them at different points in their lives. The Campbell Interest and Skills Survey is intended for students and young adults who have not entered the workforce yet. Items ask about occupational, school subjects, and work activities using a 6-point Likert type scale. And there's 200 interest items that, again, you're marking like to dislike. Would you like to dislike being a pilot, flying a commercial jet, a police detective, solving crimes, a biologist, working in a research lab? So again, this is very much self-report, and it, again, gets away from the idea of trying to measure, can you do it, and more of would you want to do it as an indicator of this might be a really good fit for you. Now you have to figure out how you would actually get to that career where you are currently in high school, for instance. So it might tell someone, that college is not a good path because you want to be a plumber. Then here you need to go to a trade school. You need to apprentice and function on that. you want to become a commercial pilot. It might make more sense to actually go into the Air Force and try to become a pilot there. A lot of commercial jet pilots are former military. So again, it gives you some information of where you're going to go. For example, if you knew you were going to college, but you actually found that you were very in line with a police detective, being an investigator, you might actually go into criminal justice as your degree. The Campbell Interest and Skill Survey has 120 skill items, excellent skills to no skills. And again, there's 120 items here that are basically asking you to self-report. For example, helping a family resolve its conflicts, making furniture using power tools, writing a magazine story. Where are your skills at? To give you a more realistic self-evaluation of where you'd actually be. So based on these various scales, the Campbell Interest and Skills Survey will give you several orientation scales. And again, you're going to see a fair amount of overlap here. They call enterprising influencing, organizing. So again, we see RISIC here. So in the parentheses is that Holland model. We see there's different names, but it's basically the same idea, with the addition of adventuring, competitive, and risk-taking. So there's 7 instead of 6, but the first 6 very much map on those Holland ones that we've already discussed. So just ending up with some generalizations about career interest measures. They are quite reliable, especially with people 18 to 19 and above. They have respectable validity. And again, why I say respectable validity is they're not incredibly valid because they're not capturing, can you actually do it? Some try to get at, a self-report of do you have the skills, but that doesn't necessarily mean you actually can do it. Little use modern psychometric theory. So most of these tests are actually fairly antiquated, if you will, in their techniques. In other words, you're not finding computer adaptive testing in most vocational interest tests. Most vocational interest tests are still using self-report and are still using very simple items as they did in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. However, they're reliable and they're fairly valid at determining whether a particular career or college degree, for instance, would be a good fit for your likes, your personality, and your interests. There is obviously a movement to online completion with more and more of these tests becoming something that you can complete very quickly online. And more, we're also seeing them paired with assessments that actually get at abilities. So not only would you like to do it, are you inclined? So for instance, we might actually give someone an interest inventory, a vocational test, which says that they'd be really good as an accountant, but also pair that with an actual test that looks at their mathematical ability. If it's not there, that still might not be a particularly good career for them. However, if they had a strong inclination towards accounting as far as their vocational interest, and they actually had the skill set in mathematics to be a good accountant, that might be a very good fit indeed. So I do encourage you to take a look at some of the other resources that are available in this module. Take a look at the 2 PDFs of the RISIC, the Holland model, and also I encourage you to, if you haven't, actually take a few tests and see where your actual vocational interests lie.